Hey guys, how you going? This is Billyeatworld, and today we're going to be taking a look at what I think are the top 5 neutral rares in Hearthstone. These are the cards that pretty much everyone needs to start off their collection, but most importantly, these are the ones you definitely don't want to disenchant. The reason I've chosen these particular cards is because they're good enough to make it into at least 2 different archetypes, and also because of their popularity on Hearthstone.com. That being said, 2 decks might not seem like a lot, but considering only the most overpowered cards see play in this game, most cards are lucky to make it into even 1, let alone 2. Before I made this video, I actually had a look at my collection, and to be honest, except for probably 1 or 2 others, these are pretty much the only neutral rares I actually use. This might help you new players out because I know when I first started playing, I always used to wonder what to disenchant, and honestly I think these are probably the only ones you need to keep. Also at this point, I usually say something like, let me know what your top 5 is, but I think it's really hard to dispute this particular list. These cards are undoubtedly some of the best cards in the game, but if you do have a different top 5, then by all means let me know what you think. But anyway, to kick off, coming in at number 5 is Violet Teacher. With a card like Piloted Shredder in the game, it's hard for other 4-drops to compete, but this card is one of the few that actually ends up being a better choice for certain decks. Violet Teacher is a 3/5 that spawns a 1/1 every time you play a spell, so in any deck with a lot of cheap spells, it's going to create tempo swings to overwhelm the board. Most commonly, you're going to see this card played in rogue decks because they have a ton of cheap spell removal and cards like Prep that make spells even cheaper. On the other hand, the other main deck you're going to see this card in is Token Druid, which uses Innovate and Living Roots to flood the board with 1/1s that get buffed up by Power of the Wild. Now, coming in next at number 4 is Defender of Argus. This card is one of the few cards that's good enough to make it into a bunch of different decks, but what's even stranger is that it works in both aggro and control. Basically, it's a 2/3 for 4 that gives adjacent minions +1/+1 and taunt, which means it's a good card for attack and defense as long as you have a few minions on the board. Like I said, Argus makes it into anything from aggressive decks like Zoolock all the way up to control decks like Handlock, but most commonly you're going to see it played in mid-range decks. For such a versatile and popular card, you'd expect to see it higher on this list, but the reason it's not is because it's not so easy to build a board anymore, and it's basically a dead card if you don't. Now, next on the list, coming in at number 3 is the infamous Knife Juggler. This is a card that's so good, I'm sure even the newest players would be familiar with it, and make no mistake, this is definitely one of the best 2-drops in the game. It's a 3/2 body that deals 1 damage to a random enemy every time you summon a minion, so assuming the juggles hit the right places, it can often win you the game. It's pretty much an auto-include for classes that rely on establishing a board early, and this forces all of the other classes to tech in cards to deal with it on turn 2. The only real weakness of this card is that it's easily removed, and because it's such a threat, you can be sure your opponent is going to try and get rid of it as soon as possible. Now, coming in next at number 2 is a Doer Drake. This is another great card from the classic set, which is commonly used in Druid, Rogue, Paladin and Mage, but it does a pretty decent job in other decks as well. It's a 4/4 body for 5 which draws a card and gives you +1 spell damage, and it also has the Dragon tag for decks that benefit from Dragon synergy. The only real problem with the Doer Drake is that its stats are pretty underpowered for the 5 mana slot, and its cost also makes it hard to combo with AoE spells. Even with this limitation though, it's still one of the most popular rares in the game, and it's one of the few cards that's versatile enough to find a place in just about every deck. Now, just before we get on to the number 1 card on this list, I probably should give an honourable mention to Wild Pyromancer, which is a great card but not quite good enough to make this list. Wild Pyro is great for clearing the board of small minions, but although it's still used in some variations of Priest and Paladin, it's not the staple it was back in 2014. Also, another decent card which is a staple in Handlock is Sunfury Protector, but apart from this, it doesn't really get used in anything else anymore. It's basically like a mini Defender of Argus without the buff effect, which is great for control decks but sadly too slow in the current meta that's ruled by aggro and tempo decks. But finally, coming in at number 1 is Sludge Belcher. This card isn't a card that you'll need to craft, but it is part of the Naxx adventure, and probably the main reason you'll need to buy it at some point if you want to build good decks. Compared to most of the other cards on this list, this card is a lot more popular, and it's pretty much the go-to taunt minion for just about every deck in the game. In the old days, the 3/5 Sen'jin Shieldmaster was pretty much a staple in just about everything, but the reason Belcher is so much better is because it's got a Goldshire Footman inside the box. For only an extra 1 mana, you can have 4/7 worth of taunt in 2 separate targets, which single-handedly can stop combo decks and forces aggro players to run silence. But anyway, guys, that just about wraps up this top 5, so let me know what you think in the comment section below. And as always, if you like what you see, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, check out the links in the description below if you want to see more of my videos, or if you want to support my channel on Patreon. And until next time, see you later, and have a good one.